Spacefarer. One preamble disclosure before we get into this episode. Kharisma is a brilliant person. We were very grateful to have her on the show. She wants to clarify that she is appearing entirely in a personal capacity. Her views do not represent the views of any organizations she has worked with or for. Not her city, not her school, not the New Paradigm Institute, or even the Visible College. These are just her views as a person. She's also a legal student at the time of this interview. She's not yet a practicing lawyer. So with those disclaimers aside, hope you enjoy her brilliant takes. What the UFO? I'm here with Kharisma Montes de Oca. Kharisma, great to meet you.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Very much my pleasure. So Kharisma is a Juris Doctorate 2025 candidate. She's going to graduate from law school next year, spring of 2026. She's an urban planner, policy writer, and project manager, and she's worked with the Visible College and the New Paradigm Institute as a legal intern for Danny Sheehan, and she's looking forward to offering her services more fully when she's licensed, which will be soon at this point. So congratulations.
Hoping, yeah.
Anticipatory congratulations.
Thank you.
So we were speaking a little bit offline about how much we value clarity, especially in the UFO UAP conversation, and how the legal world is particularly well suited to thinking about questions and problems with clarity. So I thought I'd ask you, as an entree, how you entered this field and what got you excited about it, and why you started thinking and working in this area.
In my professional life, I've always been more public service and service-minded. So I did work in the private sector on and off in the property management business. And initially, I wanted to do that because I felt like I was serving a community. I was very naive. I didn't realize, like, when you do that, if you're working for an owner of a property, you're there to manage their asset and make them money. While trying to make the community nice. But I felt I learned a lot from being on a property, because it's like a microcosm of a society, because you're sitting there and you're watching people's lives transpire every single day. And you become aware of all the internal mechanisms, especially when problems come up. So I felt like my hands were tied. Like, I wanted to find ways to help people's home feel better. Home in the sense of, like, the community they live in, where they're at in their life, how the physical environment makes you feel healthier, more focused. And I spoke to the owner, and he said, he's like, you should be go to do land use law or do policy writing or be an urban planner. And I was in my 20s at the time. And I asked him, what's that? And he explained to me. So I decided to go back to school and get a master's in urban planning. And so I did that and then entered the field of city planning in 2012. And I've been working for different municipalities in Washington State since then. And at that point, I had the same goal, very much about serving the public. And then throughout life, as everybody gets older, or even when you're younger, you have experiences where something happens, or you see somebody do something or say something to somebody else, and it just doesn't feel right. Or somebody says, that can't be legal. I'm sure everybody's said that or heard it at some point. And for me in particular, when something like that would occur and I would have that sort of knee-jerk reaction, it sat with me. It felt really heavy. And I really thought about, going to law school, back to school and going to law school eventually, because I felt like I wasn't doing enough, working for a city in earnest and being a part of planning how a community is going to function 20 years ahead of time. You're never going to see the outcome of your work, and that it is really rewarding. Looking at building designs, looking at construction plans, working with developers from the beginning of the building of a community is really rewarding. but I still didn't feel like I was making things any better, because then I started seeing things that were unjust in that position. Where, for example, you would have someone that basically is an investor, and then they come in really excited because they see a piece of property and then they really want to buy it. And the person that they've decided to recruit as their like construction manager, the developer, they come in, and I knew from my position that the developer was lying to the investor, but I can't say anything because I'm on the side of the government side. So sort of like watching these things happen in that business, I thought, like, I can't, this is bothering me, you know? So I think there's always going to be injustices in the world. And if I can have the additional armory to assist in making it a little bit more balanced. I have no delusions of grandeur where I think I'm going to make the world a better place in total. I have maybe a practical delusion where I want to at least contribute to making it a little bit better. And I feel like if I'm a licensed attorney, I have more tools to do that. So.
Wow, what a cool calling.
I hope I get to do some good work. So I'll try my best.
Well, it's interesting that you frame it that way. I wonder, do you think that's part of what you find appealing about the UFO UAP topic? Like, do you feel like there's some wrong that needs to be righted here, or some like underdog overdog story that needs warriors of justice to come fill the ranks?
I think that I was more interested in science. I liked paranormal stuff. It was like the thing I do at the end of the day when my brain has been dealing with complicated things and an email from the school and all these things. It's like, I just want to watch a video about flying saucers right now because I can't think about anything else. It's just sort of it's almost like a meditation. And so I was interested, like most people are at that level. But I think the turning point was I was like in the middle at like the apex of law school. You're taking the really, really hard classes. And I'm learning about the federal rules of evidence, and I'm learning about constitutional law. And in the middle of all that, the David Grush thing happens. And I don't know how I found out about it. It was a post on some social media. So I was like, oh, I haven't heard of this guy. So I clicked on the post and I saw that there was going to be the hearing. And I thought, okay, well, I think I want to listen to this. So I remember that moment watching the hearing, and you can tell a lot, especially if you've had to present to or prepare official documents for elected officials. I intently watched that hearing, and the one takeaway that I had was that it wasn't just justice as it pertains to UFOs, but I had this reaction of where there's an injustice happening, and it's happening to people that are working in whatever these programs are. That there's people that we don't know that exist that have been suffering for a long time. And that there's open suffering that we see that, labor attorneys deal with. There's all kinds of suffering out in the world. But this one in particular, the way that he spoke, even if UFOs were not a part of the conversation, still would have struck me very deeply. Because nobody, and even at the micro level of government, which I work in municipal government, as an employee where you're going to be a lifelong employee in that field, and you know people from other, departments, you would never do something like that, even if something really horrible had gone wrong. Never.
Do something like what? Testify or
blow the whistle. And so even if it wasn't about the topic he was talking about, him doing that alone at his rank in an environment where you're interacting with the elected body is super rare. And so for him to do that, that was enough to tell me something is really wrong.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Even if it's not about UFOs, even if it's about something else, something is still very wrong.
Fascinating. We spoke offline about wanting to ask questions that weren't getting asked in that hearing. I wonder if you remember any of the things you wanted to hear said. I have only kind of vague shapes in my head of yelling at the television and imagining different, better questions. But do you remember any?
I can't remember any of them right now. It was kind of an emotional experience to see him. It was there were multiple layers to that experience. The base layer was as a human being watching somebody else, knowing sort of the principles of being a public servant, and then taking that step is ontologically shocking unto itself. As a public servant, it is, and then hearing what he was saying, it was, I remember I just had a million questions, and I remember I had a stomach ache. I just remember the base, like lizard brain reactions to that hearing.
To your point about even if there weren't UFOs, this being amazing, like if the claim was not extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence, and it was just like the executive branch has secret science programs that don't report to Congress, even that would be extraordinary. And really whatever he's claiming to have like crawled out of the woodwork and said there are this many people who are working on something that they can't talk about is really striking. The New Paradigm Institute has talked from time to time about other whistleblowers in the pipeline. Is that something that you worked on or think about at all or feel comfortable discussing?
Yes, I am aware that they have other whistleblowers ready to go. There's different branches of the legal work that they're doing. And the branch that I was put on, because I'm the intern, so it's like whatever work you want me to do, give it to me. And so, and then there's, helping with writing, draft legislation and stuff like that. But mine in particular was focused on drafting and doing very specific research on particular legal theories having to do with the Criminal Racketeering Act. And applying existing legal principles and theories to some of the claims that some of these whistleblowers have.
Interesting.
So it was very intense. So it was intense in the sense that law school is hard enough when you're reading cases about things that have already happened.
Yeah.
And then you're, I mean, I'm glad I did it, and I'm totally all in and very fascinated because I want to know too. But applying those principles to a situation that was never contemplated in the Constitution, in the U.S. Constitution.
Sort of blue water territory.
Yeah. I mean, when it's in the gray area, basically it's like, admiralty law, space law.
Something I don't know much about as a layperson, but I hear mentioned from time to time is there's like a really important question of standing in lawsuits, especially involving the government. So if you were going to sue like the military intelligence community, you would have to be a person who had a particular grievance that you could litigate in some way. I don't know if that's even on the table at all for you, but is that part of what you guys were thinking about, like bringing cases against these secretive bodies?
I hadn't learned about that yet. Sort of, what kind of standing do you need, and what are the avenues for having a claim against a government agency, whether it's federal or municipal or whatever. I hadn't gotten to that point when I heard David Grush speak, but I know a little bit more now. But that was, now that you asked that question, I remember that was one of my reactions, like, oh, these guys need to be sued.
Yeah.
know? But with that question, I want to, can I add a twist response to that?
Great, please.
Okay. So that was my reaction as well. Like, when you hear the phrase a lot, the government has this, the government has that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from working for a municipal government, when you hear the phrase the government, sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And so that was my reaction at the time. And then, of course, I was like, okay, I need to find out what's going on, even if the stuff that he was told is true, but maybe it was interpreted a certain way and whatever. It doesn't matter. Something got him to this point, something serious. And so, of course, I was like, then I was on X. I'd never been on X before. And I was on X, and I was exposed to that mire. Then I found out about that Schumer-Rounds amendment. And I'm like, okay. I'm going to go find that. So I read that. And when I read that, that was disclosure for me. Because for two reasons. One, being someone that has had to write something much less intensive than that takes a really long time, because from the federal level going all the way down to the municipal level, you have due process, you have public notice. You can't just willy-nilly make things up and not tell anybody. You have to go through this entire process. But the thing is that most people don't even know that this process exists. Or if they do, it's like, it's something boring, like they're changing the maximum height on neighborhood fences, so throw the card away when you get it in the mail. So seeing how, going through and reading it, but from the perspective of someone that writes that stuff, and then reading it again from the perspective of someone that would have to litigate that stuff, that was sort of my overwhelming moment, because there's no way something like that would be written unless it's real.
Because it's just too much work to do.
Like, to give you an example, to change, I don't know, a line of code, or to propose a bill at the state level, even if it's like half a page long, I mean, it can take a year.
Wow. And
in that process, you have committees that need to look at it. You have interested parties. They make comments. You make changes. I mean, many, many hands touch it. Many people have feedback. You cannot ignore the feedback. There's a lot of people that have to be okay with that language. So something like that, there's no way that would have happened in a vacuum. And so for that to get to the level where it got to the point where it could be proposed like that for me, it's like, okay, there's no humanly possible way this would happen if it was just like made up. No way.
That's very interesting. I want to feel that way, but I also want to push on this from the other side, because I've heard people, even recently, one of my guests proposed the idea that basically Schumer was doing a favor to his old pal, Harry Reid, and that he kind of promised him he would look into this. And so he wrote this. Like, there is a way in which you could read that legislation as a giant fishing expedition, basically. And so, like, taking Grush's claims seriously, you could imagine basically somebody writing this legislation who has no deeper knowledge about the facts of the situation, and just saying, well, if there is any non-human technology, then you have to give it to us. But I don't know that there is. I'm just saying, if this stuff exists, then it's, the property of the government. What do you think of that theory or idea?
Oh yeah, that's kind of a controversial thing. And even like, people that are really close friends that I've talked to them about this, they freak out over the eminent domain thing. But eminent domain is something that happens. It's a topic that's closer, I guess, not closer to my heart, but closer to my knowledge base because I'm in land use stuff. And so it's a topic that comes up, takings and eminent domain. And the government already has eminent domain. If they want something, they're going to take it. But they can't just take it because then it would be a taking. They have to pay you for it. There's a negotiation.
Yeah, and the rule is based, as I understand it, the government has the right to apply eminent domain, but they would have to pay a reasonable price that, I don't know, they would determine or experts would determine. I remember it's not that long ago that the Supreme Court ruled on this. It was like 20 years ago. There was a very big eminent domain case in which they said, yes, in fact, if the state has an overwhelming interest in a piece of property, for example, they have the right to claim eminent domain, but they do have to pay for it. So that's an interesting point, that you wouldn't necessarily need to explicitly write legislation saying that.
No. It's already there. It's already there. In fact, I mean, yeah, it's been discussed. Like, I've had to write something similar, but when it comes to affordable housing, which is like my other professional life. But I mean, you communicate with them. You write them a long letter. You're like, this is why we're interested in this property. And most of the time it's like an easement. It's not a whole entire property. And then, you invite them to a discussion. It's a whole process. That's already there.
Would there be a way for Congress to do that without legislation, or is there an argument that you would have to basically write it in a bill to exercise it? No?
I don't know. I mean, the thing is that part of me feels hesitant to make any kind of assertion because I'm still a student. I don't have like 15 years of like land use litigation under my belt. So I don't know. I just know from the perspective of someone who would be the person who would have to write the letter from a municipality if we needed a piece of land for something. But that's kind of like a last resort, and it's for like public welfare. So this would be, for example, an example of something practical that would happen in eminent domain, like in the city you live in, for example. Let's say that you have an absentee landlord. They live in another state or another country, and you're trying to get a hold of them. They don't respond. And they have a property where they had a tenant who's doing crazy experiments, and then an accident happens, and you have like this minor, this site that has radiation coming from it. And people are going near it because they're curious, and you can't get a hold of the landlord. You have to do some type of thing as a city to protect people from that site. This is just a crazy example, science fiction-y example, but it's kind of like that. Like, it's like, okay, people might die. We need to do something to protect people from this thing. So, but as far as putting it, I don't know why it was in there. In fact, when I read through the whole entire thing, the thing that talked about eminent domain, it sort of went past me. I'm like, oh, we already have that. And I was like, just paying attention to everything else.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but that's a matter of opinion. And I'm not a seasoned land use attorney. But that would be the type of law that if you wanted to talk, well, your family. So you want to ask that type of lawyer that question. But when I read, go ahead.
No, you please.
So when I read the thing that kind of changed my perspective, because originally you had asked about what would it mean to sue a government department or agency. Mm-hmm. When I read that, it clicked, something clicked in me, and that was, and this is speculation, but I thought the only reason that they would even put the word eminent domain in there, because that's kind of like, well, we already have eminent domain. This is strong language, but they're also defining things. And they're defining things that have no definition right now. And once it's defined, if it becomes law and it's defined, that's like that's like a trigger point for everything else. So when you're trying to apply the law in one area of law, or you're trying to interpret something, and that thing does have a definition, that can help you go a long way. But if it doesn't have a definition, it's kind of like the Wild West, because technically it doesn't exist.
Yeah, you can't sue something that doesn't have a name, for example, an agency in the shadows.
Yeah. So I think defining non-human intelligence, defining the things that technically they would want eminent domain over, and the way it was written, I tried to put myself in the perspective of if I was working in an analogous situation that didn't have to do with UFOs, and I was writing code that said something like this, that was defining something that didn't have a definition, which happens all the time. You
Code, you mean legal code here, right?
Yeah, legal code. There's things that don't have definitions. And so you have to, for whatever reason, so you have to make an amendment and you have to give it a definition. So that I'm like, okay, they're defining things. That means there's something up because they're defining stuff. So in my speculation, my little brain, I thought, okay, well, if I was doing this and somebody has something and the word return is in there, that means at some point in time, there was a verbal agreement or a written agreement, and somebody lost control of that contract.
Yeah.
That's speculation, but that's one of my guesses. So it isn't necessarily like the government and they're all bad guys. Like, there's bad people. There's bad people in the private sector and there's bad people in the public sector. But that told me like somebody has lost control of something. They're worried about it. And if you can't get control over it by enforcing an existing contract, then you'd have to make some type of law that enables you to gain control.
Yeah. This is a really good point. What this made me think of is another important part of that legislation regarded collection of records. And I'm not sure if it called for declassification, but it called for all records that had been declassified to be centralized. I think the National Archives is still in the process of gathering these records from agencies all throughout the government. And I believe this part of the legislation passed, and it therefore became a command to all the departments of the government to send everything that wasn't too sensitive to be collected. And I wonder if that maybe had some element of a fishing expedition in contractual terms, like we're looking for that agreement that you mentioned, that transference of ownership or that power that had been lost or given away. And that, what strikes me about that is it seems like extremely unlikely to turn up any such document, because if such a document exists, it's probably extremely sensitive and heavily classified. And anything like that would be pretty easy from inside such a military or intelligence department to make a case that it was too sensitive to disclose to the National Archives. Yeah. There was such an agreement, it could stay in effect, and Congress might not even be able to find out for sure that it exists. Does that seem right to you?
I don't know. Like, I'm comfortable saying I don't know. But I really, that's as far as I felt. Like, that's where my certainty ended. Was this seems like language where somebody lost control of something that they originally had control over. And in order to gain control, you have to be able to do something that's legal, and you have to cite a law for it. And if it wasn't defined before, you have to define it so that you can take legal action.
And people have pointed to this eminent domain clause as part of the problem in the bill's passage, or in the bill's final form, because there are stakeholders in presumably aerospace defense companies who don't want to give up this material, and they have allies in Congress. And I don't know. I don't know how crazy this. I would say this is one of the less wild-eyed conspiracy theories. It's like pretty believable to me that these contractors would maybe lean on their people and say, please take out this language. And then presto chango, the language went away. And one of your colleagues in the Visible College, Steve Brown, friend of the show, pointed out that just taking out that language is some kind of smoke. It's not, exactly a smoking gun, but if there were no non-human intelligence, then there would be no reason to take out language about eminent domain over non-human intelligent technology, because it just wouldn't exist. So there would be no reason to take out that part of the legislation, but somebody did take out that part of the legislation.
Yeah.
Strongly implies they're protecting something. And nobody's ever given us a good reason for why they took that out.
Now, you have to, in school, as a student, I've learned, and hopefully will learn better as time goes on, that when you're thinking about an issue, if somebody gives you a story or a hypothetical, there's a problem, you have to look at it from both perspectives. You have to.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're talking about this, my brain is also like, well, what would be other more rational reasons for why somebody wouldn't want that in there besides
great question.
Eminent domain? Okay, so gaming this out as we're talking right now, I'm thinking, what else would be defined as non-human intelligence?
AI. Good point.
So it could be non-human intelligence, like the kind that everybody's talking about. It could be AI. It could be both. We don't know. But non-human intelligence is a term that has been used in federal laws for a little while.
Really? I didn't know that. In what context?
I don't remember. I have to look it up, and I can send it to you after we're done talking.
Cool.
I remember because I wanted to know, well, has this term ever been used in any other way before? Because if it has, then
and there's a definition on the books in the record.
Yeah, somebody else used it somewhere. And I just remember, I think I was doing research and it came up, but it doesn't come up all the time. It came up like once or twice. So that phrase has been used before. And so from the counter argument, it's like, if I was a different party, I would say, well, non-human intelligence can be a lot of things. It could be dolphins. It could be a lot of things. But I have to go back and look at that legislation that kind of blew my mind, because I'm trying to remember how it usually in proposed legislation, you have a preamble when they're defining things, and they say, these definitions mean blah, 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 that only pertain to this section of federal code or law.
Right.
Or whatever. So it kind of depends on how it was presented. And I don't remember that. But I would imagine, the way it was phrased, it allows for some wiggle room. The way it was written, it allows for plausible deniability, in my opinion. In my opinion, as a law student.
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, you could easily see legal counsel for aerospace companies saying, well, we are working on advanced intelligence systems that are going to be autonomous and robotic, and you could argue that those systems qualify for non-human intelligence. So just to be safe, let's have them take this language out because we think it could be applied to these systems we want to protect. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm desperately trying to hold on to things that I know, which, you know what, eventually I have to let go of that sometimes, because I've learned a lot of things in school that I didn't know before. But okay, so let's say that it's a tech industry. They have nothing to do with this stuff. somebody tells them about that legislation, they're working on some like crazy AI stuff. They don't want to be subject to this. So the CEO tells the attorney, I need you to stop this from happening because they could call our innovation the same thing. And I don't want somebody touching our stuff.
Because this was very interesting, I pulled up the amendment and they did define it. They said non-human intelligence. The term non-human intelligence means any sentient, intelligent, non-human life form, regardless of nature or ultimate origin, that may be presumed responsible for unidentified anomalous phenomena or of which the federal government has become aware. Life form would be the one word that I would.
Yeah. Okay.
There,
okay. Okay. So I retract my speculation on a tech company freaking out over this. It definitely has to do with a life form. So
I think you could still argue that a nervous lawyer for these companies might say, hey, look, I don't know what case somebody's going to make before the Supreme Court 20 years from now about whether AI qualifies as life. Get this out of here. It's still a danger to our proprietary technology. But I do think from Schumer's perspective, it means at least that they were not thinking about AI. They were aiming this at something extraterrestrial or non-human in another way. Okay, but let's talk a little generally. Wait, unless you had a follow-on, did you want to?
No, I just like geeking out on this stuff.
Yeah, the definitions and the words. I come from a classical theater background, and that's one of the reasons I obsess over words, because I like their poetic value and their like syntactic significance in the context of narrative. But I also come from this legal family that emphasized clarity and specificity. And so to that point, I'd love to talk to you about the broader way in which your legal training has helped you think about the UFO world, because it's quite a complicated, complex, and sometimes murky information environment. So one of the reasons I like talking to philosophers so much is that they do what you said earlier about seeing as many sides of an issue as they possibly can. Like that is the job of a philosopher and of a lawyer or a legal mind of any kind. And so that's one of the reasons I think those two kinds of people and other people who deal in structural thought are especially well suited to tackling the world of UFOs. And I wonder if you have any tips for us or any like general frameworks of thought that you bring to this challenging information environment, or if you'd like to discuss some things that seem certain to you or high likelihood versus some parts of the conversation that still seem a little less likely or a little fuzzier to you. Because there's an easy, I'll layer one more thing on here. I think it's easy to be overwhelmed sometimes when people enter the UFO space.
Yeah.
Suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, is everything real? And is like every paranormal phenomenon that I ever heard about just fact, and all the conspiracies are true, and it's all just this like wall of maybe. So I think it's really valuable to have clear thinking as your light in the dark as you stumble through all this mishigas. Does this bounce in any interesting ways for you?
Yeah, I can share a particular thought that kept popping up when I very first got exposed to this stuff, and I was listening to people talk with each other on X, on Spaces at night, which sometimes is very interesting because it's just organic conversation, even though sometimes it can implode. But it's interesting to hear people just sort of talk in the raw, basically.
Yeah,
I think even without UFOs, even when I was a child, I used to wonder where we really came from, because we aren't naturally adapted to this earth when we're born. We have to manipulate our environment to survive. And I remember thinking about that when I was a little kid. And so I always wondered about that, but it was more like, what is this and why am I here? I think probably the first thing is that it's difficult. I can hear the sometimes when I hear people talk, especially if they're upset, that there's a lot of internal pain that they're dealing with. And then you layer this stuff on top of it, and it can serve as a distraction.
Mm.
I mean, I know that's what it was for me, like last couple of years when I wanted a little break, put the kids to bed, pour a little glass of wine, watch YouTube. But I think that I think part of the reason why it's so difficult and mired, aside from all the different branches of the conspiracy theory tree, is that it's hard to know and understand something else if we haven't spent enough time knowing and understanding ourselves. And I think that's what also influences our perspective. And so I remember wanting, I mean, I never did it, but I'm like, man, I would love to host a space and invite a bunch of people. And just the first question I would ask everyone is, why do you want disclosure? Like, why is it important to you personally?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention definitions again, because what that made me think of is you have to understand what it is you're going for in the world, what it is you value, and you're going to have to define those values in order to answer that question successfully.
Yeah, what's driving you? We have to know ourselves at least well enough to be able to explain why we do things. And that's kind of my side hobby when I did have time, which I don't right now, but I've gotten rid of a lot of books to downsize because I don't know where I'm going to get hired in my first official lawyer job. So it's like I need to be ready to move anywhere.
Cool.
But one of the books, some of the books that I kept are written by this turn of the century Eastern philosopher called Gurdjieff. And it's more based on Eastern philosophy, but one of the basic principles was that man needed to learn how to master himself. Because if you can't be the steward of your own thoughts and behaviors and really explain your real true motives, then you're kind of operating almost like on automation, like a machine. And so one of the things, actually, that I just remembered something. I think once I got into this stuff after reading that legislation, that proposed amendment, like suddenly I dove into the rabbit hole with a smile on my face without any protective gear, head first. And he mentioned that he had been reading Gurdjieff, and that's when he started doing his 3 a.m. meditations.
But who mentioned that, Danny?
No, Whitley Strieber.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, I know that philosopher. So it's kind of, it combines Taoism and a couple of other things of Eastern thought, but primarily it's focused on really understanding and knowing yourself, trying to master yourself as best as you can. Because, I do it too. We do things sometimes that are so automatic or reactive. And trying to understand the phenomena and coming to grips with that and discerning, because discernment is so hard in this environment, is easier when you're first discerning what's going on inside yourself. But that's boring. Like, somebody brings that up in a space and they're like, we need to work on ourselves first. Like, everybody's like, whatever, get out of here.
Well, it's also hard.
It's very hard. I made the decision to start trying to do that a long time ago, and I'm still working on it, and I always will work on it, always. But it's like sometimes we all, get mad and we get upset with something that somebody says, and then we react to it.
Yeah.
And when I am successful at trying to do this work, I'll sit back and be like, why did I really get mad at that person? Like, what was the reason? Like, what was the real reason?
Yeah.
I think we'll have more clarity. I think if we worked internally on our own clarity, then outwardly, because I know that when I'm really intensively doing that work, for whatever reason, I've gone through phases where I've really done it, perceiving the outside world and like sifting through that stuff is more clarity. And I know that has nothing to do with legal training. But even after, like, they have newsletters for lawyers. They have, like, work-life balance articles and stuff in it. And also it talks about, being balanced within yourself.
It does have a crossover with careful thinking, I think. If you're
Yeah.
training your mind to notice all these different sides of an argument, you can also train your mind to notice different potential motivations for your own behaviors, which can be more inscrutable than we like to think. Sort of famously, there's like a fair amount of science about this now. That
Oh, there is. I mean, I didn't even know that. Yeah.
I just read a very fun book I recommend to people about this called The Elephant in the Brain, by Robin Hanson and somebody else. And they do a good job being humble about it while they're laying it out. They say, probably this is like 70% right. And also we don't understand our own motivations perfectly, but we think they have something to do with status because that's what we think everybody's doing. And it's largely about how we don't understand why we do the things we do. And often the explanations we give ourselves are just kind of structures to make us feel good more than they are accurate representations. And political pollsters will say that people are not good at telling you what they want. They'll tell you something, but it may basically be a guess. And there are some scientific experiments now about, like, if you blocking, I don't fully understand this, but there's like a half of your brain that processes language more and a half that doesn't. And you can signal to somebody by, like, sending a message just to the half of their brain that can see it, that they should, like, get up and open the door or something.
Yeah.
But then because they're not processing it consciously, they don't know why they're doing it. And then if you ask them, why are you opening the door? They'll make something up. They'll say, like, it was stuffy in here, or I have to go to the bathroom. And they're just, like, generating that as an explanation for their own activity. So this is like a really robustly studied area that you're pointing to that seems extremely important. And I wonder if you think maybe there's like a civilizational level on which it's true. Like, we have to do some introspection as a species, as nations, as a group of nations, before we're going to be able to understand other beings or other parts of reality.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not an exception to that. Me too, and some people more than others. But okay, so I totally went off on a tangent when you asked me that question. I apologize.
That's okay. I got pretty tangential there myself.
I think that, okay, the thing is that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to offer any kind of advice because I can share what I've observed when I was trying to find a community that I could talk to somebody about this. I think the number one ailment, especially for people that are experiencers, people that, I can't remember what it's called, but maybe they forgot about something that had happened to them or they had seen, they just put it out of their mind, and then they see a news article or they become interested, they read a book, and then suddenly they remember it again. And it brings up stuff. You need to talk to people about it. And some people need someone to talk to. I saw that happen a lot, but then you have people that are very frustrated and want action because they're angry about what happened to them. So you basically have people going through different stages of a grieving process. People also that are really, really curious, people that are bored and want something that gets their mind off of their really hard day, which is totally fair. I've been there. And in the middle of all of that, you have people that have had experiences that perceive that experience a certain way, that make conclusions that to them are logical and make assertions based on their perception that will trigger a response from everybody else. And everybody's looking for some kind of consistency, which is, I'm not a scientist, but basic science. Like, in order to prove something, you have to do the same thing more than once and get the same result to make some type of conclusion. But the problem is the human interaction or perception of this phenomena is unique. It changes. It changes as frequently as the person that's perceiving it. And so it makes it sometimes, I think, for us peasant lay people that don't have access to all the secrets really difficult, because it's as different as each one of us are. And so it's really, really hard to draw a conclusion. And when you can't draw a conclusion, you don't feel safe. Because you in survival mode. When you're in survival mode, your limbic system is in emergency mode, which means you subconsciously are functioning like you're in danger, and then you can't reason and think clearly. So it's this very difficult position as a group, those people that are interested in are talking about it, because you're trying to find one thread of clarity, and people want to end their suffering, sort of that constant emergency PTSD fight or flight mode, because you want some clarity and you're not getting it. And even when everybody gets together, and I know that there's people out there that are looking at, for example, tabulating the different experiences that people have had and looking for commonalities. And I know that there's commonalities, for example. But even if you find those commonalities, you're only looking at you're looking through like a pinhole at an entire planet. Like, it's still not enough to give you some clarity, something solid to say, okay, we understand this. Now we can move on to try to understand this. And I think that's what people desperately need, and they're not getting it. So it's like, from a legal standpoint, like, first, remember that this situation, this information that comes at you, whether it's real or not, and you're trying to discern it, first, give yourself a break and remember that the topic in and of itself doesn't have a single thread to hold on to.
What do you make of the more spiritual components of the UFO rabbit hole?
Yeah.
Is that something you've thought about, and has it expanded your horizons of expectations as to the potential nature of reality?
There seems to be an intersection. Spirituality, absent of an organized religious approach to spirituality, but spirituality in and of itself, our identity of who we are outside of our human bodies. I think so. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably give it an 8, based on my understanding, which is limited because it's my perception, which is also limited. But part of the reason I say that is because there's certain things about experiences that people have that are so outside of their ability to communicate using words that they can't communicate it, because they experienced it in a way that isn't in this material world. And so there isn't a material way to explain it. And I think that must have something to do with the spirit. And that's what people talk about, sort of this thing that you feel about yourself that is not the thinking part. It's a very deep question. So I'm really thinking about it. So I think that, like, in our purest form, if we have a spirit, I don't know, because I haven't been dead yet.
That you know of?
That I know of. But if that's truly the case, then there's something about our perception machine that allows us to operate in this world, remain sane, and have this life experience that we're supposed to be having. But if it's just our raw selves, and I'm sure you've met people that are more like their raw, more exposed selves, don't have a protective barrier that they've created intellectually, they are very, very heavily impacted by everything around them. And because everything around them is just sort of like random happenings, other people's attitudes, something says something happens, they go on their day. It's sort of like a ping pong ball. You get pushed around all over the place because you don't have that protective barrier, that, skeptical mind that accepts that time is the way that it is, physics is the way that it is, This table is solid. I know that it's solid. I know there's a 24-hour day. I know that there's a certain number of days in the year, even though the calendars are it's sort of made up. But these are the rules we made up to operate like normal people in the society and not lose our minds and have a quality life. But if we were just to strip all of that away and start questioning everything, or maybe not even question everything, just sort of be our vulnerable selves the way we are when we're babies. That's the spirit. And the thing is, your perception is different when you're like that. And if maybe, now I'm speculating again, maybe when you're in that perception state, you perceive the phenomenon differently. Or there's an interaction that happens that's different. Or maybe that's the only way the interaction can happen. I don't know.
Yeah, there might be some kind of truth that can only be accessed in that state of openness, for example.
Yeah, like, I don't know if you've ever had this, like when you were doing your craft, when I was performing, if I got into sort of the vibe, the flow, and I was playing with other musicians, you stop thinking and you just do, and you just know. And you can all look at each other and you just know what everybody's going to do next. This complete flow.
Yeah.
This incredible synchronicity that just happens. And that's the reason that people go watch shows, because they want to see that happen. Because it's magic.
Yeah.
And so I know there's something there, but when you're doing that, you can't be angry. You can't be worrying about the looks on people's faces in the audience. You can't be thinking about how upset you are that you got that email from your mom. Like, you can't, all of that protective barrier, that has to go away in order for you to have that flow experience as any type of performer. It can't be there. You have to be completely stripped bare.
Yeah, I think this is, I resonate with that strongly as a performing artist. Love those moments, live for them when you can get them. They're really exciting.
Yeah.
And in the UFO world, I feel like we're talking about an important balance here to some extent, that it's not necessarily the case that you have to experience the phenomenon in an open, direct, uncritical way ever. Like, I think you could just live analytically and think about it carefully and not engage with that. But I think you're onto something when you say it's possible that there may be just some aspects of reality that you can't access from a purely analytical frame with the sort of thought box around your spirit, as you suggested. And my pitch for people in this space would be to try to engage with both modes a little bit, to be open to possibly like synchronicities or like receiving a piece of information that you might have ignored otherwise, and maybe even to some like experiences that we would have previously considered supernatural or paranormal. But I think it's equally important, and maybe this is just my personality bias, but I would say maybe even slightly more important, to think carefully and try to be analytic about the situation in other times. So like moving between these modes is important, because otherwise you get stuck all in debunker land if you're purely analytic, and all in wide-eyed experience and possibly conspiracy land if you're all open all the time. So we do have to kind of switch between these modes, I think, to stay sane in this space. Does that feel right to you?
Yeah, it does. It does feel right. Like, I can't be in that headspace if I'm writing a legal memo that's an assignment that's due for class in 24 hours. Like, I can't be in like flow state. Like, no, you can't do that. So see, I'm not doing a good job of answering your questions. So your original question was the connection between spirituality and this phenomena. I think that there's a connection there, and it's difficult because when you use the term spirituality, it triggers certain ideas in different people's heads, and it's all a different kind of idea for them. For some, they call it woo, but it's something that we haven't been able to define in a science book, but there's something there. If it wasn't there, you wouldn't have the number of people that have had those experiences, which are a lot. Like, I don't know. I think it is there. I just don't know what it is. And because the analytical side of my brain is like, friend or foe, because it's unknown and there isn't a single string to hold on to, that's something that we can say, okay, we know what this is. Now we can pull the string. It's so unknown that it's like, are we in danger or not? I need to know that first.
Yeah, I have a strong analytic instinct to just like categorize every aspect of the spiritual reality. I'm drawn to the metaphysical hierarchies. There are this many spirit realms, and here's what they're called, and here are all the angels, and here's everybody's name. Like I find that appealing, and it's kind of like I don't know, reaching for comfort in a way by like pinning butterflies down.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've gone back and forth when I've listened to people talk. There's like so many different theories, and it's like, that's interesting, but you don't reject it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only time where I felt like you put it in your box of tools for later, when you're going to try to solve the problem, when you have an opportunity, when you get another new piece of data, and then you take that data and you put it in the box, and then you assemble all the pieces, and you're like, do all the pieces fit together yet? And maybe one sort of looks like it's in the same part of the puzzle. So you put those two closer together.
Yeah.
So it's a puzzle piece. People call different things by different names. We have the scientific method, then we have the legal method for, burden of proof.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different things. And I don't want to reject any of them. I want to put them in a box and just let them sit there, because none of them look like they're in the same part of the painting, but they are a part of the same puzzle. So it's like, we'll put it here. I can't put my finger on the relationship. I don't know. I mean, I've never felt so, I don't know about anything ever in my life. It's fascinating, but also really frustrating at the same time, because I want to know so that the choices I'm making are more informed. But I have a really strong feeling that there's a human component that's not directly government. And I think the UFO and the alien stuff don't scare me, but the human component that's not the government, whatever that is, that scares me.
I agree with that. And I also think it's funny that we're more scared of criminal humans than alien monsters. That's just kind of an amazing fact about us.
Yeah. 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 I mean, oh my gosh, we could talk forever about spirituality, but I think that would be another talk, many other hours.
Yeah, I've already pushed the boundaries of our time today. So as a way of moving us toward a landing, would you like to mention just what you've got your eye on as the horizon unfolds before us in the years ahead, what you're especially excited to see or curious to watch, and maybe what you're hoping for or what you might be afraid of? How are you heading into this next era of the conversation?
Yeah. I think, I'm not sure what will happen, but I am preparing myself to not always expect luxury and not always expect our society to operate the way that it's operating now. And to be a good human being and be good to the people around me, or do the best that I can, do the right thing, and help people whenever I can. And I think that as far as looking into the horizon, the one thing that I've promised myself, whatever happens, whatever we're told, whatever we're not told, is my job is to make things better, not make someone more money. whatever that means. But if we do have some type of clarity, if we get some kind of clarity, then the goal will be to just be able to create space where people can talk about it, and it isn't like a ridicule party where it's just allowing people to just talk and work through things, because I think that's what probably needs to happen more than anything.
Well, thank you for talking and working through these things with us today. This was a joy.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your time. Is there a place where you like people to engage with you on the interlines, or do you prefer to keep it personal these days?
If people want to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn. I primarily engage with people professionally right now because I wouldn't be doing anybody a service if I was going to have additional friendships or get to know people, only because I don't have time. And I would be failing people if I intimated that promise. So I would, but professionally, they can reach me on LinkedIn. That's the social media site that I limit myself to remain focused on legal studies and work.
Honestly, I used to make a lot of fun of LinkedIn. I thought it was very silly 10 or 15 years ago. And it's like, these days, it feels like the last semi-sane place on the internet. I don't know how. They were the tortoise in the race, but they've come out ahead of some zanier and more fun platforms.
Yeah, they have, because you can't necessarily create an avatar and pretend you're something you're not on there.
Mm-hmm.
So, it keeps things in check, which I like.
Well, thank you for communicating with me on LinkedIn. That was great. I appreciate meeting you there. And thank you again so much for your time. I hope we can keep in touch and watch things develop and get even more interesting in the years ahead.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
And that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening or watching. If you like WTUFO and you want it to keep existing, support us at patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout for as little as you want per month. Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, this show is brought to you by you. So thank you very much for your support. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.